my paper deals with basically two basic questions. One is there a problem in how Rothbard and Salerno develops monetary theory based on how Mises did it? Is there like a tension there? And I answer no. It's just a question of understanding correctly what Rothbard and Salerno means when we talk about exchange demand for money. Secondly, I go into the question of the quality of money, how money is really fundamentally it's a medium of exchange, but it's also something we only hold to hedge against uncertainty. In a completely certain world, we wouldn't need money. And therefore, if depending on how well or badly the primary money serves this function, there will be a demand for substitutes for what we can call quasi-money, or what Mises calls secondary media of exchange. And this we can also very nicely show and model in the Rothbard-Salerno framework. And then finally, if I have time, I will also show how we can explain at least some of the demand for things like financial assets, gold, and cryptocurrencies in this way. Yeah. So the basic Misesian idea in monetary theory is that demand for money is always demand to hold. There is no such thing, Mises claims, as circulating money, money that's somehow out there. It's always in someone's possession, in someone's cash balance, and that's what demand for money means. It means just demand to hold. Rothbard, who considered himself like the primary Misesian disciple, and Mises too considered him his primary disciple, follows this approach, at least he says he does, but then when he goes into more detailed explanations of monetary theory, he starts to disaggregate the demand for money into exchange demand and reservation demand. And of course, when we start to talk about exchange demand, that sort of sounds like this is not demand to hold. This is demand to acquire, or like maybe it's like circulating money or something like this. And Salerno, who then builds on further on Rothbard's position, even builds a model out of this where he shows how exchange demand and reservation demand for money go together into a monetary equilibrium in a very simple model. And of course, exchange demand for money is just the demand you exercise by supplying some other good. So it's simply the inverse of the supplier of other goods is the demand, the exchange demand for money. Whereas reservation demand on this model is the money that you just keep in your cash balance, hence the tension with the Misesian framework. And here we have the basic depiction of Rothbard's model, that we have MDE, the exchange demand for money, and the reservation demand for money, MDR, which sums up to the total demand for money, MD. And the stock, we are simply assuming a fixed stock of money, since the supply of money doesn't really increase very fast, usually at least. So this is like an acceptable simplification. And here we have taken from Salerno's article elaborating on Rothbard, where he just shows, he assumes only 3 commodities, but in principle we can just extend it to every conceivable, well, every actual commodity and service that is exchanged against money in the economy can be disaggregated in this way to show the exchange demand for money. And then in the lower right quadrant, we then have both the total demand and the reservation demand summed up. So as I said, this was a very brief exposition, but this is like a very nice model, but it runs the risks, at least on the surface, of cutting up the split demand for money into distinct parts, not into like this unified demand to hold that Mises theorized existed. And this would be problematic from Rothbard and Salerno's own point of view, since they insist that they are just really continuing in Mises's footsteps. But my argument here is that this problem is only apparent and not real. And what we need to focus on is Rothbard's definition of what exchange demand for money really is. And so that's the quote here, that exchange demand for money is that is the market actor's pre-income demand. As a seller of labor, land, and so on and so forth, he must supply these goods and demand money in exchange to obtain a money income. This just raises the next question, actually, what is pre- and post-income demand? Which, when Rothbard delves into monetary theory, he just assumes that we will know what he means by these concepts, and doesn't elaborate. He just refers back to an earlier chapter in his treatise, Man, Economy and State, where he lays out what he means by it. And in this earlier chapter, which deals exclusively with the time market, he says that pre-income demand is just demand by everyone who wants to increase their cash holdings, while post-income demand, as I'm sure you can guess, are demand by those who are either satisfied with how much money they hold at the time, or who might want to reduce their cash holdings. So if we keep this distinction in mind, well, then it becomes apparent that every person is continually changing between being in a state of being every person in a market economy, of course, is continually changing between being in a state of being a pre-income and a post-income demander. Everyone is continually either increasing his cash holding or in a state of rest, like in an equilibrium state, or reducing his cash holding because he wants to buy consumer goods or invest his money. So if we keep this in mind, well then my argument in the paper is that the apparent contradiction disappears. This leads us to the next, somewhat abruptly, but it does lead us to the next point, namely the question of quality of money. So all goods have some qualities that helps to fulfill whatever needs we try to fulfill with them. And this includes money. But the quality of money has not really been a focus of research until pretty recently, when, like in the last 15 years or so, when Philip Barkus especially brought this question to the fore. Now, my claim here is based on Mises and Rothbard and other writers like Hutt and Hoppe, that the primary purpose of money, and we can always debate are there more reasons to hold money, but the primary purpose is that money is a hedge against uncertainty, against Knightian uncertainty. And that therefore the qualities that we would like in a good money, in a high quality money, are qualities that allows us to use it as a hedge against uncertainty. So that would be depend primarily on two factors. At least I highlight two factors here. One is marketability, how well does it function as a medium of exchange? And the other one is expected changes in the purchasing power of money. That is, is it reasonable to expect it to keep a somewhat stable value, or to appreciate or decline in value? And a high quality money, a relatively high quality money, would then be one where we can expect stable or rising purchasing power, and where it's easy to exchange, to use it in all markets with no with no real problems, like without having to pay extra fees or similar. So marketability use as a medium of exchange depends on several factors. Some that has been highlighted are widespread non-monetary demand. So in a case of commodity money, gold or silver or whatever, demand for some non-monetary use, which is a good underlying demand to kind of act as an insurance that there will always be some demand, even if there is no exchange partner who is willing to accept it in a trade, in a normal trade. And then a legal status, I mean, if a money is legal tender, well then you have the coercive force of the government behind you to enforce use of this money. So this will also extend marketability. And then factors affecting purchasing power of money. There's again non-monetary demand. If there's high non-monetary demand, this will increase the value of money. Money production, how much is produced per period. In a case, like in a modern economy, the central bank, how it's governed, how it relates to the state, is it independent and so on, is an important point. And then finally, since we are have a system where banks create a lot of the money that's actually in use, then the status of the banks, the quality of their balance sheets and so on, what assets they have backing the money supply they issue, also becomes important. And I'm sure there are more, but those are some of the primary ones. So just like changes in the quantity of money will affect the value of money and the price level, then so changes in the quality of money will affect the price level and the value of money. And it will do that in a very analogous way to quantity changes, since if we have an increase in the supply of money, prices will increase, the value of money will fall and prices will increase. And similarly, if the quality of money falls, people will hold less of it, so the value of money will fall and prices of non-monetary goods will increase. And we can see that here that we have fall in the quality, so the reservation demand goes from MDR1 to MDR2, leading to a fall in the purchasing power of money, which is reflected in commodities markets, markets for services and so on, where demand increases, so prices increase. However, this needs to be, this conclusion, so this would just suggest that lower quality money leads to price inflation. But this needs to be modified by the existence of secondary media of exchange. That is, money substitutes, things we can use to supplement the role of money as an uncertainty hedge. Mises call these secondary media of exchange. Rothbard calls them quasi-money. We can also call them money substitutes, if we didn't use that term for different in different contexts. So financial assets, high quality financial assets are like a standard example. Gold, I would claim, is also primarily a secondary medium of exchange nowadays. Cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin could also be so, but that's perhaps more speculative. So here we have just, and since it's a secondary medium of exchange, my claim is that we can then just model it on the same Rothbard-Salerno model with exchange demand and reservation demand that sums up to total demand for gold in this case. So here I put the price perhaps a bit on the low side compared to what its actual price is. Yeah. So the point here is that if we take this into account, the existence of secondary media of exchange, then it's not really true, at least initially it's not true, that falls in the quality of money leads to general price increases. Rather, the price changes will be primarily on the side of secondary media of exchange. So that's shown here, that we have fall in the reservation demand for money due to a lower quality, which leads to an increase in the reservation demand for gold, which leads to a higher price of gold. My time is running out, so I'll just quickly conclude. If we are in a state in an economy with low quality money, this does not necessarily lead to price inflation or high levels of price inflation, but it does mean that there is more demand for secondary media of exchange. And I then claim that we can see financial assets. So this is just showing that US dollars are pretty low quality money, on at least according to one metric. Gold is a high one. And then we have the price of the yield on US treasuries as an indicator of demand for like a non-financial use as a secondary medium of exchange. And the same can possibly be said for gold. I think I'm pretty certain it is true of gold, and possibly it's also true of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. Yeah. Thank you. I'm the chairman, so are there any questions? I will.
Since I don't see raised hands, I will ask one question.
Yeah.
Libertarians before Bitcoin always were gold bugs. Now we are split, let's say, but we have seen the quality of money, the dollars, for example, especially after Nixon and no gold standard falling apart. So why? It feels like we are always right. We are so smart, but we are only so little in the world, and that's, I don't think, how the world works. So why are we not? Why haven't we moved to higher money with higher quality, for example, throughout history? Let's say throughout the 20th century, for example.
I guess because central bankers generally are not libertarians. That said, I mean, it's not. I went very quickly over the slide with the dollar. Let's see. It's not. I mean, this graph doesn't show that there's like a falling quality of money. I mean, you can claim that there's periods of falling quality of US dollars, but then there will be periods of rising or stable quality, and. So the idea that everything is always getting worse is also not true. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if that was a good answer. But.
Carl wants to ask.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I was always wondering, looking at this model, whether there is a conceptual problem when you put the stock of money into the graph and then the exchange demand. Because as I see it, the exchange demand is more of a flow variable, right? There is that's money that changes hands, and this is not happening instantaneously. And then you have a stock of money, which is just a snapshot, a point in time where you have a certain stock of money. So do you see any problem conceptually in the model? Because I mean, potentially the same amount of money could change hands multiple times, and then you would have like an exchange demand that, if you just look at the quantity of money exchanged, is much bigger than potentially the stock over a given period of time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question is, what exactly do we mean by exchange demand? I don't think we can sensibly sum it up in the way you laid out there, because when we end in such a paradoxical situation. So it's the way I see it is that it's better to see the exchange demand as at the end of a market day, so like in just an equilibrium state, that the exchange demand would be the money that actually changed hands during the preceding market in exchange for goods. Yeah. Now I was going to say something more, but now I forgot.